How cool would it be if someone took your favorite rock band and made them characters in an exciting video game adventure? Well, if your favorite band happens to be Journey and your expectations are sufficiently low, I have wonderful news for you. We'll be looking at that magical amalgamation of joystick and rock with a pair of Journey-centric video games. That's now on Game Break, except where preempted by football.
Escape into a new journey.
If you turned on your radio in the early 1980s, there was a pretty good chance you'd be treated to the arena rock sounds of a little band from San Francisco known as Journey. Forming in 1973, they released a handful of jazz fusion albums to little fanfare. But a change to their sound and the addition of big-voiced lead singer Steve Perry started them on the path to chart success. 1978's Infinity, their fourth album, was the first that sounded like the Journey that most people are familiar with, offering up the popular songs Lights and Wheel in the Sky. 1979's Evolution gave them their first top 20 hit by way of Loving, Touching, Squeezing. 1980's Departure would further the band's fortunes with hits such as Any Way You Want It, an energetic song that found its way into the public consciousness, thanks in part to its inclusion in the hit film Caddyshack. But it was 1981's Escape that shot them to the top. The record, which would sell 9 million copies since its release, produced 4 hit singles, one of which was Don't Stop Believing, the song that people won't stop playing. I mean, seriously everyone, I know the song found some major resurgence as of late, but how's about picking a different Journey song for a change, Around the time of Journey's ascent to the outer limits of the rock and roll stratosphere, video game culture was sweeping the nation. Leading the home front was Atari and their resilient VCS hardware, later rechristened the 2600. The console's ubiquity, coupled with Activision's proven success at providing software to the machine as a third party, encouraged flash-in-the-pan companies to try their hand at throwing software onto shelves, a lot of which was produced under the belief that there was no such thing as a bad idea. Data Age was one such company. They released a handful of titles for the Atari 2600 in 1982, one of which was Journey Escape, a game based quite loosely around both the cover art of the album and also the assumed hazards that befall many successful rock bands. The game begins with the band's Scarab vehicle descending to the lower left of your screen, while a monophonic version of Don't Stop Believing plays. This remains the most interesting part of the game as players soon learn, once they press the fire button. You control each member of the band one at a time. The initials on the upper right of the screen indicates the currently active member: Steve Smith, Ross Valerie, Jonathan Cain, Neil Schon, and Steve Perry. The sprite is identical for each member in both appearance and control, so really the initials only serve as an idiosyncratic way of numbering the rounds. Your job is to get each member of the band to the Scarab escape vehicle in the time allotted while avoiding the various obstacles: groupies, paparazzi, promoters, and venue walls. Some of those odd-looking barriers will reduce your score, but all will slow you down. You can run unhindered for a few seconds if you run into your loyal roadies, or the entire round if you find your rarely appearing manager, Herbie Herbert. Get the entire band to the Scarab, that is, complete 5 rounds, and you get to do it all over again. Get a high score to really prove your dedication to Journey. The graphics are quite terrible, even by 2600 standards. All the sprites are vague interpretations of what they're supposed to represent, designed by someone with a deranged imagination. Groupies are hearts with legs. The photographers are just flashing lights. Even your roadies are depicted as outer space robots, and your manager is Kool-Aid Man for some unknown reason. The gameplay fares much worse, barely rising above anything that couldn't be replicated on an old electronic handheld game. You're literally just dodging sprites. Even as the random pattern's complexity increases after each member, it grows quickly tiresome. And since the payoff is only seen in that same Scarab routine, it hardly seems worth the time or effort. I will give Journey Escape credit for getting a recognizable tune onto the VCS hardware, which wasn't very common, and being able to switch the background disco lights on and off via the color black and white switch is a nice touch, I suppose. Otherwise, this game seems like something slapped together in a short amount of time, with a recognizable license shoehorned in, assuming it would sell copies on name recognition alone. But it did not work. Sales of the game were weak, owing mostly to poor reviews. Fans of Journey most likely opted to just buy the much cheaper and infinitely more rewarding album. Data Age spent $4.5 million marketing this game, which doesn't even account for the licensing fees they still owed the band. And since many of their other titles were of dubious quality, Data Age was unable to weather that financial storm. They closed up shop after only releasing 8 titles. But despite the game bearing their name crashing and burning, Journey was still enjoying continued success. In 1983, they'd released their 8th studio album, Frontiers. Once again, 4 singles were released, all hitting the Billboard Top 40. That same year, Bally Midway would roll out a novel new arcade game based on the band. The story of the Journey arcade game dates back to 1980. Engineer Ralph Baer, widely known as the father of video games, had developed one of the earliest digital cameras that could be incorporated into arcade cabinets. While relatively inexpensive, it was only capable of delivering grayscale images. Marvin Glass & Associates, a legendary design firm responsible for some of the most memorable toys of all time, such as the Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Light Bright, and the forever awesome Evel Knievel Stunt Cycle, designed an arcade game around Baer's digital photography technology. The idea would be that players could have their picture taken from the camera behind the marquee, and their face can appear as an in-game character, even being immortalized next to their initials on the high scoreboard. Midway expressed great interest in this technology and even playtested it in Chicago, but all it took was some prankster dropping his pants in front of the camera for Midway to nix that idea fairly quickly. So I guess in that respect, Ralph Baer was responsible for the first digital pick. Midway salvaged the technology for their Journey license, hoping to have a game out in time to coincide with the band's upcoming tour. And Baer's camera that was originally intended to immortalize the player, or their genitals, was instead used on Journey themselves. Digital grayscale photographs were taken of each member's head in various states of confusion and pasted onto cartoon sprites. The end result looked like a cross between a bad grade school art project and the lamest acid trip ever. The game's plot revolves around reclaiming the band's electro-supercharged musical instruments that had been stolen by wild alien groupoids. Just go with it. Each member has his own minigame, the object of which is to collect the instrument and fight your way back to the finish line. They're about as whimsical as filling out an accident report. Steve Smith has to jump on all the drums and then shoot his way back down. Ross Valerie has to hop his way to the top and use his bass guitar as a pea shooter. Neil Schon has to jetpack around the caverns to grab his guitar, which I'm sure you guessed by now turns into a weapon. Jonathan Cain jumps over some glow sticks to get his piano of war back, and Steve Perry navigates through some swinging gates to fight off a never-ending stream of even more determined gates. Get hit by anything and your band member falls to the bottom of the screen and throws a mini tantrum. Succeed in collecting all 5 instruments and you'll get to play the role of their manager, Herbie Herbert, as he blocks the path of the aforementioned wild alien groupoids. As this is going on, you'll get to hear a section of Separate Ways, Worlds Apart. And while the other songs in the game are 8-bit renditions, this one is actual audio, courtesy of a special looping cassette stored inside the cabinet. If the aliens get to the instruments, which they most certainly eventually will, you repeat the process all over again with slightly higher difficulty. And it's probably not a very flattering opinion of Journey's musical contributions if there's a dedicated life form in the galaxy that goes out of its way to steal Journey's instruments and stash them on 5 separate planets just to get them to stop playing. The Journey arcade game seemed like little more than a tech demonstration. The game's personality, or lack thereof, played backseat to showing off digitized human heads. Everything else appears to have been an afterthought. The obstacles, the environments, even your character's legs, arms, and torso. And more damning is the fact that the game is not terribly fun to play. Retrieving your instrument that's hiding in plain sight and then shooting waves of uninteresting little blobs of pixels does not an immersive or compelling experience make. I do see a little bit of camp value in this title. You play around, giggling at the nonsensical premise and the surreal juxtaposition of grayscale head shots on a cartoonish backdrop, but was that enough for players to drop another quarter in the machine? Unlikely. And indeed, the Journey arcade game was largely forgotten by anyone who wasn't a die-hard Journey fan or arcade historian. Journey, meanwhile, released their follow-up, Raised on Radio, in 1986, minus Ross Valerie and Steve Smith. both of whom were fired on the recommendation of Steve Perry. The album spawned 4 top 40 singles, but as Perry had grown disinterested in the band, Journey went on an extended hiatus by 1987. Columbia would go on to release Journey's Greatest Hits album in 1988. This turned out to be the band's best-selling record of all time, spending over 400 weeks on the Billboard 200 album chart, and is still selling 500,000 copies a year to date. The most famous lineup of Journey reunited for their 1996 release, Trial by Fire, but Steve Perry found himself unable to tour due to injury. So I do hope that this episode has inspired you to listen to more Journey records and play less Journey-based video games. And I also hope you like, comment, and subscribe, because I'm required to ask. See you next time. And yeah, there's no such place as South Detroit, no matter what some born and raised city boy tells you.